so to speak.
Cryptocurrency and get so passionate to be spending all the time that you are obviously spending on all the research that you're doing.
Well, it's kind of like twofold. I'm in the woo-woo business, right? UFOs, space aliens, conspiracies, all of that have been since the 90s. In the 97 run, my very first run with my software where I aggregated all the data and did the very first analysis of it all, there was this little funny bit in there that got myself and some people very excited because it was basically saying that our financial system was going to come unglued, and we didn't have dates down correct or timing. And so I thought it'd be about 2005. And so I was looking for something to appear in the 2005 to 2010 area that would be a total game changer for how things are put together. And I knew that that this was a witness to history slightly ahead of it occurring. So imagine a situation where you're sitting there having a little bit of wine with the young Robespierre, and it's 1782, and you just get a vision that, oh geez, 7 years from now the monarchy will be gone, all of France will be changed, all of Europe will be changed, this kind of thing. And that's sort of what happened to me. I got a view of the upcoming history, and so could not put it down.
What data set were you looking at that you found the indications of the economic collapse?
The very first run I did, okay, so you may not know my history here. I'd worked for Microsoft, La Unum, GMC Marconi, FERC, governments, all to hell and gone, doing large-scale projects. And I had this large-scale project with Microsoft Consulting Services that was related to this thing called EAM, which was Enterprise Asset Management. The idea of what do we do if we're Nokia and we have 125,000 workstations and we need to move in new technology, this sort of thing. And once we've got it, how do we keep track of it? So it triggered in my head the idea of thinking about, well, it was operational. When Microsoft Consulting called me in, the project had been completed and delivered to the customer, and it worked, but it didn't. Okay, it functioned. It met all of their properties required in their contract. But here's what happens: you initiate a query, and the data set was so large. Bear in mind, we were running 386 machines, this kind of thing, right? And the data set was so large that it was called it was basically a multi-week response. So you'd initiate the query and you'd come back and it would start printing out results maybe 4 or 5 days later. It spooled in this particular query directly to output to high-impact, high-speed printers because they were basically trying to get an inventory out of the system. They were desperate for that. And anyway, so I started looking at what was going on and discovered they had 400 temporary tables, 380 static tables, and SQL was grinding, and they never even figured how to do indexing appropriately. So we cleaned it up as best we could, but we were still looking at a 3 or 4 day lag before it would start spitting results. And so I started thinking about this and looked at the actual data that was stored, and of course it was just billions of rows, each line item, one 386 machine, one 286 machine, and so on and so on. And so we were storing all this language over and over and over again. And I realized, oh, well, that's what's going on, is that we're actually, the brute force was killing us. And so I took that 700 table arrangement. Microsoft made me a deal. They said, if you can solve this, we'll pay you X amount of dollars. And I said, oh, but if you can't solve it, you can't bill us. And I said, sure, that'd be great. And so I examined it all, flew into Chrysler, who was the owner of the project at the time, chatted with those fellows, flew back, sat around for a couple of weeks and thought about it and came up with this thing I called the language model. And so we only stored each line item once thereafter. Okay. And then we went out. Correct. And then from every other aspect of the database was entirely hexadecimal integers, because the SQL enjoys hexadecimal integers. It works very fast with them, and it worked very well. But
of course, these days it does that for you automatically without you having to do that. But
correct,
those days, I remember.
We had to do it.
I well remember doing stuff like this. Yes.
Right, but imagine the union that then goes on, right? Because there were only 7 tables, we had no temp tables, and we had a very complex 7-way union that I illustrated with a big U, and it worked beautifully. As soon as you would type in the query, you'd start getting a response back in about 3 minutes. And so customer was thrilled, Microsoft Consulting was thrilled, everybody is happy. And I go away, and about 3 weeks later, I get a call from Microsoft Consulting Services saying, "Hey, Guy, our programmers can't figure out how to make a query now because they don't understand the 7-way table join, right?" So we had to unpack it a little bit, make it about 15 tables, and put in an interface that looked like regular SQL standard 2, you know. And then from that point on, they were quite happy with it. But it got me thinking about language, and so I started thinking, okay, well, I'm sitting here, internet's coming out, and let's see what all these people are chatting about. So I wrote a couple of spiders. This was still when we had robots.txt. Are you familiar with that? Okay, so I just literally bump it from Unix machine to Unix machine and was running on their processor if the robots.txt allowed. Nowadays, of course, it's all on my servers, just pulling in HTML, but we didn't have that option then. And so I had a very huge data set that I think we ran something like 22 million lines of aggregated data. Bear in mind, I aggregated the data through an algorithm where I was specifically looking for prescient words. I had this theory from working with a university in Mexico City, La UNAM, about language, prescience, and emotion. And so I had to build this thing called the emotion reduction engine, which was basically assigning an emotive value at all these different levels to each and every word in a multi-dimensional array,
so
right?
You're basically tapping the collective wisdom of the internet to get an aggregate feeling of like what people are worried about and what people think are going to happen. And yeah, that's a very interesting project.
And I was keying in on the worried part. I was keying in on the emotion because my idea, I had to have some practical use for it just so that I wouldn't feel stupid about doing all this work. And so my goal was, well, I would game the stock market. You know, I would find out what the next company is going to have a huge worry and at the time I didn't understand shorting, so I didn't even put that in there to look for downtrends. I was only looking for uptrends.
Sure, yeah.
You know, but anyway, so it sort of worked. I did my first full-fledged run, and I got back, I was actually targeting SUN, SUN, Stanford University Network.
Yep.
And so it went all to hell from that point on, though, because I kept getting back all these references to the sun disease. And it was clearly not talking about the computing platform. It was talking about the big scary ball in the sky.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at it from that and started looking at some of these other things. And in the process, went on in there and was looking at the money aspect, because there's, of course, all kinds of prescient words around money. And then I noticed off in the corner there was this collection that clustered around the idea of replacement. And of course, the more I drilled into it, the more the idea came along that there would be a replacement for the current monetary system. Now, being young in those days and very naive, I thought it would happen, just 5 years, no worries. You know, instead of 35 or 40 generations or whatever it's going to take. But anyway, so that's how I got hooked on it. And then when Satoshi's white paper came out in 2009, you know, I stood up and shouted, "This is it!" And if my life hadn't been so hellacious, I would have written mining programs right then. As it was, I got involved in late 2010 and have been with it ever since. 2012, I knew. 2012, I knew for sure that we were that we'd passed the point of liftoff, so to speak, that we were never coming back. That it wouldn't fail, and that's when I started recommending it to people. Since then, I now am driven by the sort of like revenge on my enemies. Okay. So from this perspective, right? It'd be one thing if I used such knowledge to make myself wealthy, and I could become a fairly wealthy individual and live a lot better than I am now. But my goal was to be as disruptive as possible. And so I thought to myself, if there was going to be this occurrence where software was going to eat money, then there's a lot of people that could be involved, but they're not techie. They're not savvy to the software.
Yep.
So I decided to set myself up as a mouthpiece for that, and Universe would provide me listening ears.
Yep.
And so far we've got listening ears, and I have in my email bins now 6 email thank you notes from people that have made themselves millionaires following this advice.
Yep.
And so this is highly disruptive to have these people come on in from the woo-woo side, from the fringe element side, and gain economic power. And so not only are we going to change the world with the cryptocurrencies, but the people that are getting in it and making themselves wealthy just because of their attitudes now and their now new position of power, the world is starting to shift even more. I suspect we'll see disclosure by 2020, mostly as a result of what's going to happen over these next couple of years.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. Yeah, I your story resonates with me a lot. It reminds me of, I think in 2010, which is also when I got into Bitcoin, the only people that could really see what was happening were people who had a background with strong technical knowledge and strong interest in economics and a willingness to sort of see the illusion of the whole monetary system. Those things are not common attributes among people, and I that your vision of sort of getting the word out there, because very, very few people were fortunate enough to have that unique combination of interests and mental mindset to be able to see what was coming. So that's great. That's a great story. Yeah, my own story is kind of similar. I was interested in the stock market. I was running really complicated spreadsheets trying to predict which way the stock market was going to go and things like that. And I started getting interested in penny stocks because they did stupid things sometimes, and sometimes those stupid things seemed predictable. I remember I found out about Bitcoin trying to. I was researching payment systems. I was interested in chargebacks. I was wondering, why can't we have an electronic payment system that doesn't have this risk of chargebacks? And somebody said, oh, well, you could always use Bitcoin. And I started, what's Bitcoin, right? And so I started reading about it. I was like, wow, this could take over the world, idea. Right? Like, it's just going to completely take over the world. And I remember I took this to my wife and I said, this is going to be big. Like, you don't have any idea how big this is going to be, So we started talking about this, and well, how do you buy it? Well, it turns out this is 2010. I said, well, I could wire money to this kind of sketchy-looking website. It's called Mt. Gox, or there's another way I could. There's this guy in Canada. I don't know if you remember this on the Bitcoin forum. You could mail him cash in an envelope.
Yeah.
He would send you.
He would send you Bitcoin.
Right. So I was like, well, I want to put some cash in an envelope and mail it to this guy in Canada. He's going to send me this magic internet money. It's going to be a big deal. And so you can sort of imagine how my wife took that. She did not like that idea at all.
I didn't tell mine.
So we argued about this. So, we had 2 children and one on the way. We didn't have a lot of extra money, so we argued about it for months. Finally, my birthday and Christmas came around at roughly the same time of year, and she said, here's $200. I'm tired of arguing about this. Just flush it down the toilet if you want to. So I put that money into mining. I started I guess you could call it a mining scheme. I started advertising on Craigslist for people that had video cards. And this was 2011 by the time I started the mining scheme. And so I would pay people in advance to run my cryptography project, which I won't tell you what it is. But I'll pay you in advance every month, and it'll pay off your video card in the course of like 6 to 8 months. And so I had college kids mostly around the world who did Bitcoin mining for me without knowing it was Bitcoin mining.
Pretty sneaky.
Yeah, it was. I disguised the Bitcoin mining software and kind of hid it in another software package so it looked like something else. So anyway, that's how I got into Bitcoin. The first ICO came out of some thinking that I was doing about treating it as a protocol layer. Now you'll appreciate the idea, which at that time people were thinking of Bitcoin as money. I thought we could also think of it as a protocol layer, the same way we build, HTTP on top of TCP/IP on top of Ethernet. We stack these protocol layers. We could do that with money protocols. And so that's how the idea for Mastercoin came about. I needed a way to pay for my crazy protocol ideas that I wanted to do. And so we did the first token sale ever. It was just literally me putting a Bitcoin address on the Bitcoin forum and saying anybody that sends Bitcoin to this address automatically owns Mastercoin. And $500,000 came in from random strangers, which was a bizarre feeling.
Staggering.
We've seen that in much larger scales these days, but at that time that had never happened before. And so then Bitcoin went up tenfold shortly thereafter, and I found myself sitting on $5 million worth of Bitcoin that I needed to spend on this project, and so quit my job. The token that we released called Mastercoin went up 100-fold, so I sold like 2 or 3% of that, and I thought, okay, that's just enough to quit my job. And it'll keep going up. Well, it didn't keep going up. In fact, a bunch of other projects launched, one of which was Ethereum, and people sort of lost interest in the way I wanted to do things. And the price of we ended up changing the name at one point from Mastercoin to Omni. It's still called Omni to this day, but the price went down almost 100-fold. So I found myself back where I started financially, essentially. A little better than if I had done nothing, but still, I had to go back to my day job because I didn't want to sell all. Like I had put all of my Bitcoin into Omni, and I didn't want to sell my baby, So I was like, well, I have to either sell some of this or go back to my day job. So I went back to my day job and I worked there for a few more years actually until I had this opportunity came up with UpToken. So. And they weren't even going to do a token. CoinMe, they were thinking about maybe doing some sort of token sale around other concepts, and I said, no, you need to do one for ATMs. It's like the perfect way to do a token sale. So I got so excited about that, and of course the value of cryptocurrencies was in a nice bubble, and so there's lots of money raining from the sky on all these projects. I was like, look, you guys, this is the perfect token sale. We've got to run with this, and so I basically talked them into doing a token sale. And I have not done any. I haven't been directly involved with any other token sales between doing the very first one and this one. So.
And now you're into the ATM side of it, the hardware side of it.
Yep.
Beautiful space though.
Yeah.
Some of the things that are occurring, for instance, I'm in Washington State. Where are you located?
We're in Washington State as well. Yeah, we're in Seattle and South Lake Union in a co-working space here. So.
Oh, okay. So you're aware of what's happened with all of the exchanges. Yes. Now they've dropped Washington like we were, a rock on fire.
Yes.
ATMs are the route around that.
Yeah, well, and of course, CoinMe has to deal with that. CoinMe is a licensed money transmitter in the state of Washington, and we have to deal with all the hoops that they want us to jump through in order to do that. A lot of companies did pull out, and of course, we're based here, and so we didn't pull out, and we committed to jumping through all those hoops. But it does get around the hoops for the common person for sure. So,
and that's where it's going to. Grow from, at least in terms of our data, okay? Yeah. Because Washington State is not unique in being a butthead about cryptos.
Yes.
And just as an aside, too, if you guys are ever going to go push on any of the legislature or government in Olympia, give me a heads up. I'd be glad to come on in. I'm local to the town, so it wouldn't be a problem for me to come on in and we can chat, maybe try and change some minds.
Yeah, it'd be great. It's I'm told that the regulators in Washington State want to be friendly to innovation, and they just are just not doing a good job of it.
I'm told the opposite. Yeah. I'm actually told that the orders are coming out of for Washington. Well, okay, I'm in the woo-woo world. Okay, yeah. So my data and my personal perspective is that Washington State is the trial balloon site for a lot of the crud that comes out of Washington D.C. And so I've been told that the regulators in Washington D.C. are telling Washington State how to perform because they want to set up a model.
Interesting.
And whether or not that's accurate, it sure does appear to be a good explanation for why they've been so regressive these past 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That could
didn't used to be that way. Remember, Coinbase was one of the first ones that came on in. Washington State let them just fly.
Yep. Yep.
And then since then, it's been regulation on regulation on regulation. And actually, it's not even regulation; it's the reporting part of it that's killing everybody.
Yep. Yeah, it's been a pain. They've been, CoinMe had to talk to 200 banks before they found someone who would give them a bank account. 200 banks.
Yeah.
It's It's madness.
I say I know of banks now that are telling their customers, if you buy Bitcoin, you lose your account with us.
Yeah, yeah. They're hostile to it, both from a couple perspectives. One is sort of like, well, we have to, we take on risk when Bitcoin transactions are happening, and I kind of understand that. But I think there's also they're starting to recognize the threat that cryptocurrencies present to the whole model that they are a part of. So I don't think they would ever admit that, but I think that is also a part of what's going on there. Well, I'm interested to hear you. I haven't heard the word woo-woo before. Is that a self-identifying term, or is that something you came up with?
Sure. It actually comes from a takeoff of the movie Captain Ron.
I don't think I've seen that.
Okay, it's a screwy sailing movie, and I can't think of the guy's name. He's a decent actor. He's in there with Martin Short and stuff. Anyway, they're sailing around the Caribbean, and there's this one scene where the Captain Ron has to tell everybody else, this is the Caribbean, El Caribe, the Spanish Main. It's a place full of hoodoo, voodoo, and he goes on to say shit and other things, but I say woo-woo.
Yeah, okay.
So something where we're throwing in the conspiracies with the zombies, right?
From that perspective, then, what is your theory about the creation of Bitcoin? I mean, that's just rife with possibility for conspiracies.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that say it was, an NSA job and this sort of thing. However, there's something that's very interesting here. I'm a linguist now and have been for the past 20 plus years. And when I read this Satoshi paper, I realized that I was dealing with an individual author.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. Yeah.
Right. There were not two minds involved there. There was not a group think in creating that. I can say that from the linguistics of the paper itself. And then I've also examined the Satoshi emails that were going on during that period of time. And again, we're seeing a single mind there. Yeah. Now, maybe this mind was a representative of the greater collective deep state that wanted things to move a particular way. And so we have to imagine ourselves in a historical situation here. You're way too young for this. You wouldn't grasp this idea natively, I don't think. But we are indeed at a point where the fiat currencies are dying. All of the currencies that are dollar tied are collapsing because of the debt load. Yes. Almost all currencies die between 42 years and 80 years of life. There's never been one that's gone longer than 80 years except for the U.S. dollar. And truly, we have to reckon the U.S. dollar from 1972 when Nixon took us off the foreign exchangeable gold standard, right? So that's really our time frame on this. So imagine a situation where you have a collective group of people that are in power and who are part of the fiat issuing scheme at the very top, and they know it is dying. And so there's an option. We can go into the dark chaos of the Black Ages as the dollar dies and nearly 1.5 billion people die without the support that was involved from the dollar, and there's wars and all of this. Or we can come up with an alternative. And so then they look around and they say, well, gold and silver would be an alternative. Not. You can't have you can't effectively send gold coins or silver coins to Amazon for your purchase. So we're entirely in this system now. Yes. These people also know that we've doubled our population as a result of the debt. That since the Federal Reserve came in, the population has doubled. And if we don't want at least half of that population to die off, if we wish to continue with the population we have now and the thrust we have into technology, the only way to do it is to come up with some other alternative. So maybe the NSA over the 50s and 60s, because bear in mind, in the 60s, there was discussion about digital money. And we had some number of writings involved in the digital money world out of DOD, out of the DARPA projects and so on, all through the 70s. And it sort of ceased about 78. And I think that's when they actually got the idea solid and started working on it. And then at some point, Satoshi was either part of it, co-opted, the PR, the front piece, whatever it was, and out they bring this. Now, this is a conspiracy theory. And in this theory, you would say, well, why would they do this? Well, it's in their own interest to have a smooth transition to a new system. And from my perspective, I saw this potential in 2005 and realized that the people at the top are not going to allow themselves to be chopped off at the knees. They will participate in the formation of the new system, and when we see them moving into that new system, then I can be assured at that point that that is the system that's been chosen and will survive. And I also knew that they weren't going to go to gold and silver. And see, this is where I had to depart with a lot of the gold guys who got really pissed at me because I kept saying that, gold's going to go up, but it's not going to be meaningful because we won't care about gold. It'll simply be a storehouse, a legacy kind of media for some period of time. And here we are. Here we are. The world is fractured. It's not going to be corralled by the banks. And their whole scheme is sort of going wrong, but they've got to continue with it because it is successful at its basic core. And it's going to get even more so. Think of the trillions of dollars that exist now captured in fiat that have no place to go. Okay, so they can buy gold, and it would drive gold to, $500,000 an ounce maybe, but it's still useless as a currency. Nowadays, we've got the current cryptos, and boy, now we're really moving.
Yeah, that's the same realization that I had very early on. As I drew visually bubbles of the size of the various monetary systems. How if I put a bubble of how many $1 trillion is the stock market next to a bubble, how big is the money supply in all the banks, and a bubble for all the cash in the world. I looked up all these numbers. I drew all these bubbles, and I drew Bitcoin as a bubble. And at that time, Bitcoin was barely a pixel. In this giant thing of, and one of the bubbles, the derivatives market was so big, I could only fit like a corner of that bubble onto the picture. It was just like this huge, it's like the size of the sun compared to, the moon. It's just so much bigger. The derivatives market, trillions of dollars. And obviously these are
quadrillions.
Yeah. And the foreign exchange and all of these absurd numbers, if you imagine even the tiniest fraction of that moving into cryptocurrencies, and I can easily imagine a large fraction of moving into cryptocurrencies, you see the current valuations as laughably small, and I don't know.
We're there now. It is laughably small. I actually think that between February of this coming year and February of the following year, we'll cross the adaptive valley from innovators into early adopters. And I think we've only really gotten maybe about half of the innovators at this stage, but now we're starting to get publicity, and so we're going to shoot into the early adopters. So imagine a 100-fold or 1,000-fold or 1,000,000-fold interest at a social level in cryptocurrencies.
Yes. And I'm finding, very few people these days, when I talk about Bitcoin, are like, I've never heard of that. Every once in a while, I still run into somebody who's like, I don't know what that is. But usually they've at least heard of it. And that's a pretty wide awareness. And I live here in Seattle, so maybe, it may be a little skewed technically here versus other parts of the country and certainly other parts of the world. But it's definitely gaining some momentum. And it really concerns me what is going to happen if and when fiat currency does collapse, with the idea of, even if they're not printing it all the time, if people don't want it, it has no value, right? Like if everyone's trying to move to cryptocurrency, grandma's savings account becomes worth zero. And I'm very concerned about grandma and the fact that she's never going to get cryptocurrency, never going to be able to understand it probably. And what's going to happen to these people that aren't able to make the transition mentally or just conceptually, to be able to make that leap of, from fiat into crypto. They could be incredibly harmed by the economic transition. And I think things like what you're doing help a lot. But there's
well, we run. I've also branched out. I've got a friend of mine, Joe, in Tampa, who does videos on getting started. He also does consulting to help people through. He's helped a number of people get involved with that. Bix Weir is approaching it from another side. So it's spreading out. We have basically only about 6 or 7 months now, though, before we reach into a major level of social disruption as the currencies are heaved about. Won't hit Russia, won't hit China as bad as us, but of course they have vast quantities of dollar holdings, and so they'll take a hit as well. But I agree with you. It's it's the are aged elders that are of most concern because they will be left out. And then also there are the people on the other end of the spectrum, the very young, who have yet to be able to get any kind of a financial security under their belt, so to speak, because they've been running into the dying fiat system as they're trying to come into a productive workforce. And we have to admit that our social order has gone all to hell in terms of getting people motivated to be workers and, challenge themselves, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I figured, an old bald guy out here saying, hey, look, this shit's making money for me, and, this kind of a deal, right? Yeah. That's why way back when I decided I would not. So I bought some, I was still an investor in Bitcoin right after Mt. Gox was when I thought, oh, hey, this is great. Love the idea of this giant crash.
Yeah.
And I was able to actually buy some Bitcoin because it was going too fast, And Mt. Gox was screwy as hell. I never dealt with them. I was actually having more trouble dealing with the exchange in Poland at the time. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you were aware of them and the machinations you had to go through to get any Bitcoin out of them.
I vaguely recall hearing stories about that. I stayed as far away from the exchanges as I possibly could because I was like, they're going to get hacked. It's just any complicated system becomes unraveled like that. Yeah, it's absolutely. Yeah. It's the biggest. It is. It's the biggest honeypot, the biggest prize for finding exploits that exists is these exchanges. And there's really brilliant people in various Eastern European countries sitting in their underwear on the couch that all they do all day long is think about how to exploit cryptocurrency vulnerabilities and smart contracts.
I know a couple of these guys.
Right. So I prefer not to stay away from the exchanges, and if I have to use an exchange, I use it as briefly as I possibly can for exactly that reason.
Yeah, same here. But even back then, it was like right after Mt. Gox went down, I purchased some Bitcoins from Coinbase. I think I paid $40 each for them or something. And that was the last. From that point on, it dawned on me, well, we'd actually achieved network effect because there was a local place in Olympia that would accept Bitcoins. I can't remember who it was at the moment. I thought, aha. And then I knew that we were going to go really solid with Bitcoin. So I changed my stance and started earning in Bitcoin. So I just put it out that if you wanted to buy my report, you could buy it with Bitcoin. And it wouldn't be as expensive as those pizzas.
Nice.
Yeah. And so since then I don't purchase, I just earn in it. Yeah.
Huh.
Interesting stuff though. But talking about the ecosystem and this sort of thing, I was so irritated because of the DAO, right?
Yes.
Because I'm sitting around here, I'm doing my reports, looking at all this stuff, examining this, and it struck me when I was reading all of the GitHubs and all the literature about the formation of the DAO and the releasing of it, and the opening of the system, I kept thinking, well, there's a lot of stuff missing here. Nobody has talked about what you're going to do if someone writes an aggressive bot. And so I was going to do that. I was going to write an aggressive DAO that would go on out there and gain vast quantities of coin off of people. Now, my idea was to be a stand-up guy and return the coin and tell them, okay, I burned you just so you would learn. Here's your coin back. Right. Don't fall for it again.
Yes.
And then this other guy came along and beat me to it, and he wanted to keep the coin.
Yep. Yeah, that's.
But there's still two types of bots they never wrote. They never wrote a nasty bot, and nobody ever wrote a sneaky bot. And so that's still open for us. I think we still have to go through that learning phase here. But a lot of these things are predictable relative to the ecosystem. And now that I'm pretty sure we're going to cross over into the early adopters, I expect we're going to go through a big hiccup in getting those fellows off their couch and getting them more aggressive to get at the honeypots once we get into February, March of next year. But it shouldn't matter at that. Well, the current cryptocurrencies should be so large, we'll be able to take a few hits and not really worry about it much.
Yeah, the honeypots are going to get so big at some point that you'll be able to, fund an entire research division at a university to do one hack, and it would be vastly profitable. And I'm not saying a real university, but that scale of research would be profitable if the exchanges continue to get as bigger. And I think really the only long-term solution that works is decentralized exchange, where I and you in a decentralized peer-to-peer way trade the cryptocurrencies that we want to trade. that was one of the things that led me to do Omni, and it literally has a distributed exchange built into it. You can go onto Omni today and trade between Bitcoin and Omni and other things like Tether and MadeSafe that are hosted on Omni. But people don't like well, there's the slowness. Like, you have to wait for the Bitcoin transactions, on an exchange, you can buy right now and sell 10 seconds later, right? But on a distributed exchange, you have to wait for the blockchain to record each step and to make sure that it's actually in the blockchain. So yeah, you can trade, but you have to wait 30 minutes, before it's really a done deal. And people they're just not used to that paradigm of thinking. But if you compare that to the risk of putting, however many thousands or in some cases millions of dollars onto an exchange, the risk profile is so much
the
different.
risk reward ratio is all shot to hell. Well, the thing too about the exchanges and the waiting, we haven't been trained for it. And then there's the other downside to it, like Ether Delta. It's easy to game. Okay. And so you're going to be able to get some of the noobs involved by, you got 1,000 shares or 1,000 Ether, and you're dealing, trading in, something, Veritasium or something. Mm-hmm. And so you sell off Veritasium at deliberate, under the market, so you keep driving the price down and then come in and do a big swoop at the end. You see this happening over and over again.
Tons of market manipulation happening. I even see it. So and the people that own the coin sometimes have no control over it. Like, I saw it happen to Omni once. I was like, who is driving the price up and then crashing it? And it was clearly somebody being very manipulative, trying to get a certain price pattern to get people to do a certain thing and then exploit that. It's just
right.
And
so social exploits as opposed to software.
Yeah, absolutely. And
but in the end, it's better than the pooled approach, in my opinion, because the exchanges are vulnerable. One day they'll be caught out. They like Mt. Gox, they won't have enough in the pool to do settlement as people try and get out, and they're subject to manipulation as it is. And in fact, many of them are probably manipulators themselves.
Yep. And we've seen that as well.
Yeah, so distributed exchanges are the way to go. I'm looking for the smart contract approach to show up for people that don't have time as an issue. Yeah. So in other words, I might want to sell 5 Bitcoin, and I don't care if it happens today or tomorrow.
Yes.
And I could put them into a contract and tell the contract, I want you to negotiate in these particular parameters. And if you get a good deal, fine. If not, come back and tell me, and we'll try it again.
Yes.
And then if it meets the parameters, and it takes 3 to 5 hours to close because of everything going on the Ethereum network, because of ICOs or whatever, big deal,
Yes, and that's the kind of trading that we need to happen. Essentially what you're talking about there is kind of a limit order. I want to sell this price, and I'll kind of wait for someone to come along at that price. And it's an order book. And you can have a 2-sided order book on the blockchain. We do on Omni. Hardly anybody uses it, but it's there.
I just don't understand. Well, also there's another component that's lacking, though, at least in my opinion, and that is that I want to have my bot be able to analyze who it's dealing with. So
we definitely don't have that
to say that
anonymous.
Right, and I don't care about knowing who it is. I just want to know their trading track record, so to speak, and that they could close the deal, right?
Yes.
And so there'd be a certain amount in my smart contract. There would be a certain amount of qualification, if you will, for the task. Now I'm waiting for something like there's another scheme out there, Spectre. Have you seen them?
I don't think so. Of course, there's a ton of projects that I haven't researched that
right.
are probably deserving my
research. This is a central pool. This is a distributed exchange with a supposedly distributed pool, and they've got a payback scheme for those people that help fund the pool, and it all sounds very nice, and I'm sure it's really solid. They've got a great team behind them. I'm not opposed to that, but it strikes me you could game the whole system at a very large macro level by hitting it with multiple bots at the same time, and drive in just to loot their distributed pool. And I don't really understand how they're going to be able to maintain the pool aspect if it's that distributed.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there is exactly up the line of my thinking of complexity theory. Just like there are certain systems, especially when you come to cryptocurrency and monetary rules built into things, as you build complexity, you're basically adding more and more doors to your vault, right? And one of those doors is going to have a fault. And there are people that are willing to spend all day, every day, looking for those faults. And the more complexity you add, the more doors there are. I every time that I have the opportunity, I say, what is the simplest possible complexity that I could use for whatever it is I'm trying to do? I mean, so you probably saw this with UpToken. We used literally the minimum viable token for the ERC20 token. I did not want.
It was clean.
Anything else.
It was what I called tight.
So, and I just literally took the minimum viable token from Ethereum's website. We did not change one line of that code because I'm very concerned about the complexity in these contracts, and everything that we add or change, or every cool feature that sounds so awesome, it comes with a cost of there might be a way to hack that, and we won't find that out. And some of these things, they go a year before someone's like, oh, hey, here's an exploit for this thing. So just because you've had smart people review it doesn't mean that every possible exploit has been found. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying. In fact,
the people I work with too, on those guys that are on their couch sitting around thinking about this, a lot of them will sit there and just do thinking. I happen to know of a couple of operations that or projects that are ongoing now, and one of them was very smart. I won't go into any of the details, but these people have 2 tiers of cracking bonuses, and they were really sharp, and they went out on the deep web. And they put out their cracking call out there, and they were shocked at the number of exploits that actually showed up against their project that were quasi-viable. So they haven't even paid out yet on their cracking bonuses. One's $100,000 and the other's $250,000 US. And if you can reach so far, you can obtain the code, and they'll be quite happy to pay you for it. But they've really tightened up their operation just in getting this peripheral amount of frenzy around those cracking bonuses. And they were quite shocked at how many people crawled out of the deep web once that was available. I mean, I think I was told that there were 65 active connections within minutes of posting that. So, pretty good approach.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting few years coming up. I guess we'll just have to hang on tight, huh?
I'm a surfer, and so I like to get loose,
surf the wave. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's about.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. It's, if you can see the wave coming, you can surf the wave. Well, I've got another call I've got to move to here pretty soon. So it was such a pleasure talking to you, though. I really enjoyed hearing all of your things. You've given me a lot to think about, actually. So I'm sure I'll get lost in various websites trying to think about some of the things you brought up. So I appreciate you doing that. And
watch out for that woo-woo.
Yeah,
that rabbit hole has no bottom.
Oh, I know. I've done a little poking around on that stuff before. So it's a fascinating world. But please. One
last thing before I let that particular idea. When I was coming up and I was a programmer in the 80s, when the HTML and the internet, even the BBSs, we had 2 things. As soon as we had the connection on the internet, we had all the techies talking about tech stuff, and the very first subject other than technology on the internet was UFOs.
Interesting.
Yeah, it has the longest history.
I would have thought it was pornography, but
no. No, UFOs are much more fascinating.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, please keep up the good work. You're a soldier in the effort to get all the knowledge out there that needs to be gotten out. So thank you for your
and take me up on the offer to kick ass on the legislators if you ever head that way.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Talk to you later.